Hey there, it's Tom Ryan, founder and CEO of ICR. Before we get into the next episode, I wanted to ask that you subscribe to the show. It'll help us get even more unique and interesting guests on the podcast and in turn continue to educate management teams and the growing ecosystem that creates value for fast-growing private and public companies. And while you're at it, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Very much appreciated.
Leagues, teams, tournaments, conferences, athletic departments, NGBs, anybody that owns media rights, we advise them on their media business.
The rise of digital media has created so many new avenues for the sports industry to deliver content to fans. But in a media landscape that's becoming increasingly complex, how you license your intellectual property and what it's actually worth are often billion-dollar questions.
The world is changing very quickly in the realm of media, as you know, and with people cutting the cord and the rise of direct-to-consumer and the influence of social and gambling and AI. So a lot of the kind of properties I just mentioned, they want help just thinking about how to navigate all those changes.
Being a public company can be hard. Small missteps can have outsized consequences. I'm Tom Ryan, founder and CEO of ICR, and over the last 25 years, we've helped thousands of companies understand and navigate the stock market and the media. We'll demystify these and other increasingly complex stakeholder groups so you can focus on what you do best, building your company and unlocking your true potential. This is Welcome to the Arena from ICR. If you've tuned in or tried to tune into a sporting event recently, you'll understand just how the media business has changed in the past few years. Where sporting events used to be clustered among a handful of TV channels, now following your favorite team might require a subscription to a whole litany of cable and streaming services, which is to say nothing of all the licensed content you'll find spread out across social media platforms. So in a media ecosystem so complex and diffuse, how organizations even begin to think about licensing their assets is a big question. How do they go about calculating the actual value? That's exactly where today's guest comes in. Doug Perlman is the founder and CEO of Sports Media Advisors. SMA advises sports properties on their media strategies and rights negotiations. Doug has negotiated tens of billions of dollars in rights fees for some of the largest sports properties in the world, including the NFL, NASCAR, U.S. Soccer, and the Ryder Cup, among others. Doug began his career as a lawyer at Proskauer Rose. He then moved to the National Hockey League and served as their EVP of Media. He also served as president of IMG Media. He founded SMA in 2009, which has been recognized by multiple publications as a leader in the sports media and technology industries. Let's enter the arena with Doug Perlman.
I really got my focus on the sports industry when I was in law school. I think when I was in college, had anybody said, would you like to work in sports? I would have said absolutely, but I never would have known exactly what that might have meant. And when I was coming out of college, candidly, I really wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And I got some great advice from a family friend who talked about law school, keeping all sorts of options open for you and being great training for really anything. So that was why I went to law school. And while I was there in my second year, I took a class in intellectual property, like the law about rights, trademarks, copyrights, etc. And that really excited me and interested me. I thought it was sort of intellectually engaging. And that's when I decided to pursue a career in sports and entertainment.
Yeah.
And that's why I went to Proskauer, because they represent all the leagues. And that's kind of how it started.
Very cool. And then how did the NHL opportunity come to you? Because I think when I look at your career, that was really your longest run. How did that opportunity come to you? What about it was like, I'm going for it?
Yeah, I was really fortunate. They were a client of Proskauer, and I had done a lot of work for the NBA and a lot of work for the NHL while I was there. I was there less than 2 years, actually, and their general counsel asked me to come on board, and I was just thrilled. As I said, I had kind of gone to Proskauer with the idea that I'd love to enter the sports industry. It was just such an exciting opportunity. I jumped at it, and as you said, I spent about 10 years there. And about a year in is when I transitioned from a legal role to a business role and started to get focused on media.
When you were at the NHL, was there somebody there who was a mentor to you to kind of get you from the legal position into business development, strategy, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, absolutely. I had two great mentors at the NHL, and as you know, that's so critical to the evolution of anyone's career. The first was the general counsel at NHL Enterprises who offered me the position, a gentleman named Richard Zond, and we continue to be very close. And he was just took great interest in his people and kind of put his people at the top of his priority list. So he was terrific. And then another gentleman named Steve Solomon, he was the number 2 guy at the league at the time. And the way it all began, and it sounds so funny to anybody now that follows the space, in the mid-90s, the NHL was really just getting online. We had a website, there was very little information on it. And IBM came to the league and said, you really need to jump into the digital age and let's form a joint venture. We'll put up the technology and the capital. You contribute the intellectual property, and then you'll have a website. And they kind of educated us on where the world was headed. And there was really nobody to work on that deal. There was no digital person. And so I was very fortunate. I got staffed on that deal. I knew nothing.
What year was that roughly?
1996, I would say.
Yeah. So like the internet, like what's the internet?
Literally, like
it'll never become anything. Yeah.
I literally went out and bought Internet for Dummies. I was so excited to be staffed on that deal. And again, I was just very lucky because there was nobody else that knew more than me. It was all brand new. And as I worked on the deal, it became very clear that it was going to change the whole industry because I had to go to the head of broadcasting and say, someday there's going to be video on the internet.
Yeah.
And I had to go to the head of licensing and say, someday we're going to be selling product. And I had to go to the head of PR and say, what's going to be our policy for breaking news? And the head of sponsorship, because we're going to sell advertising. So like it was an incredibly cool and interesting deal to work on. And then ultimately I was, presenting to the owners, and there I was, I don't think I was 30 yet, presenting to the owners. And then as that deal kind of came into place, I went to the commissioner and said, I'd love to be the digital guy. And I've told the same joke for 30 years, but I think had he fully appreciated the implications, he would have kicked me out of his office. But at the time he said, sure. And that was how I transitioned from legal into business and really got into media.
Now you were there for a decade, so you must have worked on some other stuff that was like super interesting and compelling.
Yeah, it was a great 10-year run. Commissioner Bettman, who of course is still the commissioner, the longest serving commissioner in North American sports, ran a great operation and was really terrific about giving younger people opportunities. So as I said, I was able to really help run the digital business from the beginning. And then ultimately I oversaw television as well. So, while I was there, we launched the NHL Network, which of course is still going strong, would negotiate national deals with ESPN and Fox, and then later what became NBC Sports Network. So we saw a ton of interesting things there. And it was a fascinating time, again, particularly in the digital realm, as that became a bigger and more sophisticated business.
Yeah, totally. And then you went on to IMG and subsequently found SMA. What did you see in the market that, where you were like, hey, listen, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to start something. What was missing in the market that you kind of came in and filled that void?
I always call myself a fake entrepreneur. Like, you're a real entrepreneur. We all know real entrepreneurs, and they'll never work for anybody else, right? Like they've got that mentality. And, as we just talked about, I worked for sort of big corporate folks for 15 or so years, but I always wanted to do my own thing. I always had an eye on that and thought it would be ideal. And so in 2008 or so, I was just kind of looking around. I was really lucky about my time at the NHL and later IMG, where I had gotten to work on both digital and television transactions in a significant way. So I understood both. And very few people in the industry understood both. And I saw the notion that the two were converging.
Yeah.
TV and digital were going to kind of become one thing. And I thought it was a real advantage that I knew both. And I also felt like I was sort of young enough. I was approaching 40 where I had the energy to really go for it. But I had also been around long enough that I had relationships and some expertise that you needed. And so I decided to go for it. And my business plan was literally, I'm going to give it a year and hopefully I'll get a client. And like I said, if it didn't work out after a year, I would have gone back and gotten a corporate job. But, fortunately, we're 16 or 17 years in and it's been good.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it's such a cool area that you work in. And I kind of glossed over it in that introduction, but maybe break down sports media advisors for people who don't know. I know you operate in 3 distinct buckets. Each one is really cool. Take us through those 3 buckets and then maybe go one by one and give us an example of something that you do, something tangible that you might be able to talk about.
So the first one, and probably what we're best known for, is we advise sports properties on their media business. So leagues, teams, tournaments, conferences, athletic departments, NGBs, anybody that owns media rights, we advise them on their media business. So that can be helping them with strategy and or helping them to negotiate their rights deals. So, the world is changing very quickly in the realm of media, as you know, and with people cutting the cord and the rise of direct to consumer and the influence of social and gambling and AI. So a lot of the kind of properties I just mentioned, they want help just thinking about how to navigate all those changes.
Yep.
And like I said, for many of them, we'll negotiate what people still call their TV deals, but they're obviously now multi-platform video distribution deals. And we've worked with everybody from, bowling and bass fishing and pickleball to the NFL and NASCAR and USTA and Ryder Cup and US Soccer and on and on. The second thing we do is a little tougher to describe. We help people navigate the sports landscape. It's a very relationship-driven industry, very idiosyncratic. And so we'll help them kind of figure out a go-to-market strategy, financial modeling or strategic planning. And then when they're ready, for a lot of them, we'll kind of take them out to the industry and help them with warm introductions and kind of leverage our experience and credibility to further their objectives. So those companies can look really different from one another. Like we worked with Twitter when they were first trying to get into the sports realm. Obviously a huge company, but they were just getting into sports. We've also worked with younger companies, like we did a ton of work in the VR space. We're doing work right now with an AI company out of Israel that they have a very successful business, but they want help kind of navigating the rights landscape within sports and sort of speaking to the right people. And then the last bucket is actually kind of exploding right now, which is we advise a lot of private equity firms and other investors who are looking to invest in sports. So as you probably know, the leagues all changed their rules recently to allow for institutional investors to own parts of teams. And so we're working with some of the biggest firms out there right now as they look at investments in teams or conferences or other entities. And the most common thing they'll ask us is to help them understand what the next media rights deal might look like. So if you were going to invest in a team or sports property and you were building a financial model, projecting that rights deal is one of the most important things you're going to do. So we'll help them do that, and they can think about how to assess the opportunity.
Yeah, I feel like your timing throughout your career has been pretty darn good, like from the rise of the internet to like there's so much money going into professional sports and teams, and with the rule change that you referenced, it seems like a free-for-all to get partial liquidity even for a big, like let's say NFL team. There's only like a few individuals on the planet that could even do that, right? You
Totally.
have to put a consortium together, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. The numbers have gotten so big. There were fewer and fewer individuals that could afford to invest in the team. So they open up to institutional investors. And I think, so far so good. And you're right. I've had very, very lucky timing. We talked about sort of the advent of digital and all the change that brought. I was really fortunate. I've also been, in the media space during a time when media rights fees have grown dramatically. Again, nothing of my doing, but very fortunate timing. And now the two areas that are really growing for us right now are that private equity investment, as we talked about, and then also the college business. There's so much chaos in college. There's a lot of confusion out there. Our unofficial firm motto is, we're a little less confused than you. So,
I mean, look, college is now professional sports, right?
Yeah.
Maybe those legacy programs are different and maybe the leagues have to merge to get economies of scale. And look, it's all about money. I wanted to ask you, Doug, about how people consume sports, because I know for me, I'm older, I watch stuff on TV, but a lot of people never watch the actual game. They watch clips on, Twitter or social media, highlights on YouTube, all of that stuff. How do you go into a negotiation or kind of model out the value of the rights given all of those like moving parts? How do you approach like the negotiation or the modeling of that?
Yeah, you're spot on. It's gotten so much more complex, and we have a great team here of guys who build out what are quite sophisticated financial models to try to get a sense of what the rights are worth. I will say it's not a math problem.
Yeah.
Right? Like, again, we have guys who are the best in the business at building those models, but that's always just the starting point, right? You need to walk into the negotiation with credibility for the number you're asking for. But then the negotiation takes on a life like any negotiation does. And can you foster competition? The most important thing to try to do is to convince folks, if they're not convinced already, that a property has strategic value, right? Beyond just sort of what the X's and O's might suggest. So yeah, that's a huge part of what we do. Today, the rights are worth different things to different people. It used to be, well, the people that we're talking to are all in the same business and, hopefully we can achieve our objectives. But here, CBS is in a different business from ESPN, which is in a different business from Amazon, which is in a different business from Apple. And so they're all going to build their models differently, and the same property can be worth different things to different people. So it's gotten much more complicated.
As legacy media and investor profiles shift, there are profound changes happening in the industry. I wanted to know more about how huge players with deep pockets like Amazon and Netflix have altered the calculus when it comes to negotiating rights.
Yeah, they certainly have the capacity to, but they're also pretty sophisticated and disciplined in their approach to negotiation. If they really want it, undoubtedly they're going to get it. And I think the legacy media companies have that concern. They're keeping a close eye. Apple and Amazon are already in the business, and Netflix has now joined.
Yep.
I think Netflix has a lot of the legacy media companies' attention as they look to see what they do. So, yeah, those folks have incredibly deep pockets, which is great news for the sellers of rights. But they're also, again, very sophisticated in their analytics and disciplined in their approach. So just because they have the capacity doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a big payday beyond what a property is worth.
They're disciplined allocators of capital. That's why they're worth trillions of dollars.
Yeah, exactly. They got that way for a reason.
Yeah. Doug, would you consider sports teams and leagues kind of media companies now?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, as soon as teams and leagues started websites and offering content and selling ads, they became media companies themselves. There were a lot of issues to navigate in the early days that you might not necessarily think about. But, when they started, for example, showing highlights, they were in competition with their biggest media partners. And when they started selling product, they were in competition with retailers with whom they worked on the sale of licensed product, and on and on. And the biggest properties have their own TV networks. So they're full-fledged media companies with production capabilities and sales and distribution, et cetera. So that's certainly been a change, throughout my career. There was a sense that those outlets might someday carry sort of the primary programming of different properties. You haven't really seen that. I personally don't expect to see that because usually the rights are kind of worth more in the hands of third parties who, again, can ascribe strategic value to the rights. But there's no doubt they are all media companies in their own right.
Let's talk about a few issues. There's so much going on in your world. What's your take on cord cutting and how it affects the sports ecosystem?
Yeah, it's probably one of the things we spend the most time thinking about is the implications of cord cutting, people that are dropping cable and just, getting their entertainment and news and other programming from other sources.
Yep.
So the number of people that are paying for the cable networks that carry sports has declined rapidly over the years. And, that obviously has an effect on their economics, which has an effect on the available cash that they have to spend on sports rights. So that's something obviously we keep a close eye on and we're well aware of. And that's really led to the migration to direct-to-consumer offerings. So all the media companies are now offering content directly to the consumer rather than through a cable or satellite company. And you can run down the list, right? CBS has Paramount Plus, and NBC has Peacock, ESPN Plus. Fox has been the sole legacy media company to not have a direct-to-consumer offering, but they just announced that they're going to have one. So that's how those media companies are trying to navigate the future. They're trying to get the most that they can out of the legacy cable business, which has been an incredible business, but also seeing the decline in subscribers and cord cutting and trying to emerge in that new direct-to-consumer space.
How about the rise of gambling, all the online stuff? What's your take on that?
Again, another that has huge implications for the sports business broadly and our business in particular. The simplest way to think about it is if folks have a bet on a game, they're more likely to watch that game and they're more likely to watch it longer, regardless of how interesting a game it is, right? So obviously fantasy can have the same sort of impact where you'll watch a game that you never would have cared about because you happen to have the backup running back and he needs to get X yards. And as you probably know, a lot of the betting today isn't necessarily on who wins, right?
Yeah. You can make any bet of any kind during a game, right?
Exactly right. So all of a sudden, a game whose score may not be interesting can be very interesting to you if you're a gambler. And so that's a good thing for the properties with whom we work because, again, more people are interested and they stay tuned longer. And some sports lend themselves to gambling more than others, and those are the ones that will benefit the most.
One area that I think is super interesting that I'd love to hear your opinion on is women's sports. What's your take on the rise of women's sports? How are kind of your clients thinking about it? How do you think about it?
You're well prepared. You're hitting on all the mega trends that are affecting us and our business every day. The increase in the popularity of women's sports has been great to see, and again, having a huge impact on the business. For a long time, a lot of the conversation about women's sports, there was a lot of should, right? You should buy it, you should watch it, you should give it the attention that it deserves, which was always true, but it wasn't a commercial discussion in the way it has been over the last few years. Now the discussion around women's sports is, the same as it is for men's, which is the commercial appeal, the commercial value, what the rights are worth, et cetera. So it's really exciting to see. We're doing a bunch of work in the women's space, and I only see that growing from here. It's not a trend. It's sort of a new permanent state of things. So many women's sports are driving really meaningful viewership, tremendous fan engagement. So it's a huge change, I think a great one.
Big opportunity. And then I guess the last one I wanted to hit on was AI. You mentioned you're working with a company in that space, but it seems to me that you've got to get up to speed on all this stuff like super fast and be smart on it. But based on what you've heard and read, and you're kind of in the mix on everything, how do you think AI is going to affect maybe the way consumers consume, and then how these properties and leagues make the most of it and maximize their opportunity?
AI has had a role in the sports industry for a while now, but I would say up until today, it's been very much about creating efficiency, right? So, for example, if you're at one of the major leagues, instead of having a bunch of young guys, tagging game footage so that you can archive it and retrieve it, AI has really taken on that function. So AI will note that this is a 5-star play, and that was a 3-star dunk, and that was a game-winning three-pointer, so that it can then be easily retrieved and distributed in very efficient ways. So that's kind of been a lot of the history of AI in sports. But where it's headed now is generative AI, and it's going to be about the creation of content. And I think that's incredibly exciting, and there's a ton of applications, but one that I'm particularly intrigued by is the ability to really personalize content to the consumer. So a highlight package to an 8-year-old boy who's interested in superheroes will look like one thing, and to a 16-year-old girl it'll be another, and to middle-aged folks it'll be another. And it's almost infinite, the number of ways that you can slice and dice and target it. And so, you've seen some of these telecasts, like the Nickelodeon telecast in the NFL game, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I think you're going to see more of that. Live is tougher, but that's coming. But certainly in terms of highlights, which are such an important way for people to engage with the sport. So that's a big part of what we're going to see coming.
Do you think there will be a league of robots playing football against each other or something in the future? Because they're probably cheaper than players. And that's an exaggeration, but technology is coming. And I'm sure that either that's going to happen, or at a basic level, AI, as it relates to like the sports betting companies, right? They'll never forget to upsell, right? In a situation, hey, it's, 1st and 10. Do you want to do something else? I mean,
totally.
It just seems insane what could happen, 20 years from now.
Totally. Yeah, no, it will definitely impact betting. It's impact the way that some of these telecasts are produced. Like you saw maybe what Amazon did with some of the predictive things they did in-game based on the way the teams were approaching a particular play. So you'll definitely see that. And you also see fun things where, you could sort of pit two classic teams against one another.
Yeah.
Or, I just saw a demonstration where they talked about how a game would have changed if one particular play went differently. So you make that three-pointer from a miss to a make, and then play out the game from there, and it's pretty wild.
I mean, like you could just see people in their basement just like on their devices, like, doing every machination possible in the future. So look, it's good for owners of these sports properties and good for SMA. Doug, what are the best events that kind of get you charged, given that you do it for a living and you've been doing this for a long time? What do you like the best?
I'm very fortunate in that I've been to a lot of incredible sporting events, and that I can honestly say it's part of my job. As I think about my just personal favorites, one of my great memories is that I was at the game when Reggie Jackson had 3 home runs in the World Series. So
no way.
Yeah,
Wow.
I was a young guy, a huge Yankee fan. I think I was there in full uniform, by the way. And,
with a glove.
Definitely with the glove. I didn't catch anything, but I was there with the glove.
Yep.
And that's an incredible memory because I was so into those teams as a young guy.
Yeah.
And then again, as a fan, as you know, I'm a big fan of Duke basketball, and have been lucky enough to see the Duke Carolina game in Cameron a number of times. And I think there's just a great energy in that building, and have a lot of fun supporting that team. So those are some of my favorites. But of course, as I said, really fortunate to get to go to a lot of different things. And I love the variety as well, just enjoying all kinds of sports.
So, how about like an event that you had never been to that maybe opened your eyes to a real niche and valuable property?
I would say the two that jump to mind as you asked that question, and they're kind of at quite different from one another. One would be NASCAR.
Yep.
I'd never been to a NASCAR race before we started representing them. And then I was able to go to quite a few. And then I really got it and got, the excitement and thrill of those races, and the engagement of those fans is incredible.
Yep.
And another would be we're fortunate enough to represent the Westminster Kennel Club, which, as you know, is the premier dog show. It's been around for 150 years. I didn't know much about it when we started working with them, but I've been lucky enough to attend. It's traditionally at Madison Square Garden, and it is just a really cool, engaging show that people love. So, I had never been to either of those and really enjoyed both.
It's so cool. And how about, is there something that you haven't been to that you'd like to?
I've never been to the World Cup. It's obviously coming here to the U.S., and we've done quite a bit of work in the soccer space, including with USA Soccer. So I'm hopeful that I'll be able to go to games while they're here. And I've never been to the Olympics. I should have gone when I was at the NHL.
Yeah.
The NHL players were participating, and I had an opportunity, but then I ended up not doing it. So I regret that. So those are two events that I'd love to see.
Yeah. And then I guess my final question, Doug, is what advice do you give people trying to break into sports? It's such a fun and cool industry to be a part of, which attracts a lot of really smart kids coming out of school. What advice do you give people trying to break in?
Probably the biggest piece of advice that I give them is to try to focus on a discipline within the industry that interests them, that they think they might want to pursue. I talk to so many young folks who say like, oh, I love sports and I want to combine my passion for sports with my career, which is totally fine. I mean, that's what I would have said when I was 21 or 22. But people in the industry don't want to hire fans.
Yeah.
Right? They want to hire people that are good at something.
Yep.
Right? So I try to encourage people to think about the different disciplines within the industry and then really talk about that and say, I'm really interested in corporate marketing and sponsorship for the following reasons and would love to do that here. And then it helps give them a focus to their career search, but also I think increases their chances of finding something that interests them.
As the sports industry shifts away from traditional models of content delivery, it creates new opportunities to generate engagement and profit. But as the landscape becomes more complicated, it's harder to define your product and its value to different investors with different goals. And now, with the emergence of generative AI as a tool for driving engagement, with sports betting altering consumption habits and the explosion of interest in women's sports, the next few years in sports media could be extremely interesting and extremely lucrative for those with the foresight and know-how to capitalize on these shifts. At Welcome to the Arena from ICR, we're working really hard to bring you exciting guests and great content. If you found this episode insightful, please subscribe to the show on your podcast app and leave us a 5-star rating. The more the show grows, the more interesting voices we can have on the podcast, and in turn, that should demystify a lot of the stakeholders around public companies and soon-to-be public companies. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to Doug Perlman for sharing his fascinating insights into the current state of sports media. It's going to be really interesting to see how sports media advisors and the sports industry in general adjust to meet these new challenges and growth opportunities. This is Tom Ryan. We'll see you next time back in the arena.
References to specific stocks are not intended to be recommendations for specific trading behavior. Comments presented on this podcast are intended for informational and educational purposes only, and do not represent opinions or recommendations on whether to buy, sell, or hold shares of a particular stock. All investors are advised to conduct their own independent research into individual stocks before making a trading decision. In addition, investors are advised that past stock performance is no guarantee of future price performance.